Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Geometer's Compass podcast number 8. And this is Geoff speaking from Dublin in Ireland. And this is
Scott Onstott in Victoria, Canada. And we're joined today by
David Mathisen. I am in California. I'm in the city of Paso de Robles, which most people just say Paso Robles or even just Paso. It's on the central coast of California.
Ooh, California. Nice.
And thank you
Welcome,
for having
David.
me.
Oh, it's
Thank
great
you so
to have
much,
you here. We're
Now,
excited about chatting. Scott.
I met you, David, in person years ago. Must have been, I'm going to guess 2013 or something like that. 2014, maybe.
Yeah, we met on a couple occasions, Scott. We were in a conference in California one time.
That's right.
Southern
Yeah.
California. But one other time we met at a restaurant somewhere. You were doing some kind of a project, and I was there with one of my
Oh, yeah.
sons, actually. And somehow we met and just had a coffee together or something. I don't.
Yeah. I
That was
remember
before. That was before the conference.
I was down in Carpinteria doing instructional videos for lynda.com, which later was bought out by LinkedIn. And Paso is not too far from that. So I looked you up and we got together. That's right. And
That's right.
and all three of us were going to do a conference at one time together, and we may do again someday, I hope. But we
Yeah, me
have kind of
too.
a mutual resonance with each other, I know, and it's unfortunate, but we've kind of fallen out of touch for a while. And now I'm discovering that you've written 9 books already, David. I'm amazed. And your site, starmythworld.com, has that material. And you're really an expert at the myths of the world and relating them to the stars and showing that the a lot of the stories that are in myths and even in religions are actually allegories of what's happening in the heavens. They're actually a clothing on this skeleton of the stars, and they're kind of fleshing out what's happening in the heavens down below here in the microcosm. Is that a good way of putting it, David?
Yes, that's put brilliantly, Scott. And the Earth figures in there, of course, that you are measuring and showing these incredible connections, and the mandalas that Geoff makes out there with all the gifts of nature into these mandalas, I believe are also celestial in their connections and their depictions and some of their symbology. And it's relating what's going on in the heavens to what's going on inside of us, actually. And our story that we're in, the story of the myths is actually a story about each one of us. It's not about something that happened to some literal terrestrial figure thousands of years ago, if it's metaphorical. And if it's metaphorical, then it's talking about something else. And what I believe it's talking about is us. So yes, those motions, I call it the stars and heavenly cycles, are what the myths are using as the foundation for what it's like a code or a language, a metaphorical, esoteric language that the myths are using, where the different figures in the myth, I'm talking about Moses or the goddess Athena or the figure of Heracles or Perseus, or all the different stories of the biblical scriptures like Samson, can be related to specific constellations and parts of the sky, including the Milky Way. But that turning of the earth and our relationship with the sun and the other planets and the moon, of course, create these cycles. And those cycles are very much the framework for this esoteric language that is relating to actually the experience that we're having right now in this incarnate life, where we're in this physical body, but we have this invisible spiritual component. We all know we're something more than a body. There's this invisible divine spark that's in everybody, and the myths are depicting that with this metaphorical system that they're using.
I think of
I
it
think that was put
a little
great.
bit like the Netflix of the past, where the stars, because everybody would look up and they would be very familiar with the constellations and the movements and the relationships between the constellations. And we've lost that in the last 100 years. We've lost that connection largely with going outside and being really intimately familiar with the constellations. And I love how you go out in a lot of your in-person workshops, you'll go out and reacquaint people with the stars and where they are and what they, and connecting those stories with the what you see with your eyes is very powerful,
Absolutely. That is, I love to do that. And I love to hear people's reactions when they say, oh, it's, that's Ophiuchus. It's so much bigger than I thought it was. And even when I show it on the printed page in my books, because of course I include hundreds of star charts, or in my videos where typically I'll use Stellarium, which is a wonderful online app that's free that people can download. It's an open source app that's like a planetarium on your computer, but it does a wonderful job. But the constellations, the size and majestic, magnitude of the constellations just doesn't come across the same way. So if you have an opportunity to go outside and see the stars on a clear, dark night, I think it's just the best. It's like the best basically free hobby that you can take up, and you can do it every single night if you're able to do it. I just recommend it to everybody.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you specifically about Ophiuchus, and because I have kind of developed a theory about it that I want to share with you, and I want to pick your brain, if I may, about what you see as the meaning of that, because I know you're such an expert at not only the constellations but the myths, and I'm really just an amateur in that area, and I wanted to get a sense of that. Now, Ophiuchus is one of the constellations of the Zodiac, but it's one that has been removed, really. There's really 13 Zodiac constellations, or there were at one time in the distant past. And Ophiuchus is that 13th. Like, we have Aries, and we have Taurus, and we have Gemini, and Ophiuchus is one of those, but it's been kind of forgotten. So what's up with that? What do you think? Why did that happen, David?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a really important question. In the years so we're all just re-catching up with one another. And it was really 2015 that we were talking about doing this conference 6 years ago. So in those intervening years, I have really come to understand and become convinced that Ophiuchus is this pivotal figure that is in the Zodiac, but not in the Zodiac. And there are important esoteric reasons for that. There's a message in that. I don't know that it was necessarily malevolent that Ophiuchus was, quote, kicked out. But it is certainly, your observation is absolutely accurate that Ophiuchus, the outline of Ophiuchus, has a portion of the constellation that the ecliptic runs through. So the Zodiac, just to, not everybody is as master of a geometer as you two are, but in the Earth, and it's in the geometry that lays over the Earth and then goes out into the heavens. But our relationship with the sun forms, a plane, like you could think of a kitchen table, a round table in your kitchen or in your dining room, or like the round table of King Arthur. This plane, if we put the Earth in the middle of it and the sun going around the edge, or the sun in the middle of it and the Earth going around the edge, doesn't matter. The same table will form the plane between the Earth and the sun. Well, then you could project out to the walls of the room. If this table is in our living room and we were to paint stars literally on all the walls, all four walls, and the ceiling and the floor, and they would be constellations. Well, which ones would be the Zodiac? They would be the ones that are on line with the plane of the table, the tabletop. So if we were to extend the tabletop out to the walls and draw a line at the same exact level as the tabletop, that line would go through certain stars, which would become the zodiac. The zodiac are the stars, the background stars that the sun, quote, moves through in our annual relationship with the sun. As we go around this dance that we have going on with the sun, there's a different background set of stars based on the different positions of the two objects on that table. Well, Ophiuchus happens to actually have a foot going through that line, but most of Ophiuchus is above that line. So it's like Ophiuchus is in the plane and yet also in some way above the plane. And this relates to this wonderful post that you wrote, Scott, relating Ophiuchus and wisdom, and you called it serpent wisdom. Somehow this Ophiuchus figure is above the plane of our ordinary existence of the zodiac, and connected to something higher, connected to something invisible. And you know, we were chatting a bit before we started and talking about synchronicities. And just this past weekend, I did a show with a wonderful astrologer named Ksenia in Australia. And she wanted to talk about this very same topic, which is synchronistic in and of itself, the 13th zodiac. So I recommend people check that out as well, because it's got some visual showing the earth and the sun, that relationship that I just described. But it's, you know, you wrote this post about serpent wisdom and Ophiuchus a long time ago and shared it with me even back then. And I was just revisiting it and how wonderful and eye-opening and astonishing some of the connections that you found are. And so I've become convinced that Ophiuchus is this pivotal figure because it connects where we are also with something higher. And that something higher, just to close off this little ramble that I just went on, is related to higher self, our own higher self.
Well, that is really fascinating. I never thought of that or came up with that. So I think that we're really enriched by that analysis that you have on that, because that really takes it up to a higher level, doesn't it? And I just want to
explained.
I just want to throw in a little of what I think of the math behind why Ophiuchus is there and not there. Okay. And it has to do with the kind of really important number 153, you know? It's in the Bible that, like, what was it? Simon Peter drew up a net full of fishes and there were 100.
The miraculous catch.
The miraculous
catch.
Yeah. And so I think it was Robin Heath who came up with the idea that the square root of 153 is actually 12.369 approximately, which is the number of lunations in a year. And so,
wow.
So you've got, like, in our current calendar, we have 12 months, right? These are kind of solar months. And yet we have 12.369. So we're on the way to 13, you know? And in a way, there's this thing called the International Fixed Calendar. And it's a brilliant calendar. It's got so much to recommend for it. And it's got 13 months of 4 weeks of 7 days each. And if you have that adds up to 364 days. And so then all you need is one more day or two, depending on if it's a leap year, to have as like a festival day at the end of the year, a year and a day. And so in my Serpent Wisdom post, I think I talked about a year and a day, or maybe that was in Taking Measure, one of my books, where I talk about that as a really ancient way of reckoning time, is the 13-month calendar. And it also kind of resonates with the moon, because you've got the sidereal period of the moon, which is 27.3 days. That's the time it takes the moon to orbit around the Earth once with respect to the fixed stars. And then you also have the synod period of the moon, which is 29.5 days. And so because of that, the math behind it makes you can either have 12 or 13 months to fill out a year.
Wow.
And so there's an option there, right? And I see, I don't know if this is really borne out by fact or it's just coming from my intuition, that the 12-month calendar is somehow patriarchal, you know, and somehow the 13-month calendar is more matriarchal. And I see it as kind of echoed in the fear of the number 13 that we have in our culture. Did you know that in North America, I don't know, is this true in Ireland, Geoff, that in multi-story buildings, there's never a 13th floor?
No, not in Ireland. No, we have a saying that 13 is unlucky for some, which is a lovely saying because it leaves it open that well, what about the others then? Is it lucky for some? So 13 is unlucky for some, not for all, So, no, 13, there'd be no particular problem with 13
because
in Ireland.
It's true
Certainly not
like in San Francisco,
floors.
where I used to work, you'll never go into a high rise that has a 13th floor. It just blows my mind. Like, are we really that superstitious?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Hey guys, I'm enjoying talking to the two of you because you're kind of like masters in your field, and I kind of I got a lovely view from the side here, onto Scott's work and onto your work, David, and we were talking a bit before we came on, and I know you do feel a bit like this, but one of the things Scott and I adore about sacred geometry is its capacity to sort of open us up to these beautiful, quite genuinely beautiful patterns of order, in the world around us. And it occurs at every level, And I think, there's a crossing point eventually with sacred geometry when you look at the sort of the motion of the planet, the size of the planet, its relative size in relationship to the sun, the moon, how all that just drops into these beautiful patterns of order. I won't bore people with the numbers, but 2160 is the diameter of the moon, and you've got 2160 degrees on the cube, and you've got 864 on the sun, which coincides with the seconds in the day. You've got all these correspondences between time and space and the motion of our planet, its near satellite, and the source of life, the sun. And so I get great comfort from that, actually. I get great comfort just the more I get to open to, wow, like just this amazing pattern of order all around us, like from our DNA to the dance of Venus, and it almost feels like a cosmic happy pill. You can take it any moment, That's why I get a kick out of a full moon, these patterns of order. But David, I'm sensing with your work, that as you've looked into like the stars and the way the stars have been incorporated into these ancient myths, I'd like to ask you directly, like, have you sensed this order and harmony and a kind of a beauty that goes with your field? I'm sensing there is, but I'd love to just invite you to share on that if my projection is accurate.
Yes. So short answer is yes. I mean, that was a beautiful discussion. We started with the moon and the calendar, and there used to be lunisolar calendars, which incorporated both. And in fact, almost all ancient calendars appear to have been lunisolar, but we've now divorced the calendar completely from the sun. But to your point, Geoff, that you're just making, the moon being the perfect size to make eclipses, particularly solar eclipses, which are just so stunning. I've now had the opportunity to see one in person. Since we all were talking, I got to go to
cool.
I drove all the way up to the path of the total eclipse that happened in, now I'm forgetting the year. It might have been
I was there too. We went to Idaho for that one.
I went to Oregon. I thought of Idaho. Yeah, I thought of Oregon. But the fact that the moon is even the perfect size and distance to make a total eclipse is really astonishing and difficult. Even the moon itself, its distance. I love this quotation. It's from Dr. Walt Brown, whose work I was doing a lot with in the very early kind of stages, talking about geological formations around the world, actually. But he has this quotation about the moon. Some scientists said, very funny, the best explanation for the moon is that it doesn't exist, because all the other explanations just don't really, it's hard to really explain how it has that perfect distance and it doesn't eventually crash into the earth, or it doesn't eventually fly off and it's just at the perfect distance, and it makes these eclipses. It's just unbelievable. And we just actually had an eclipse, although you had to go to Antarctica to be or the ocean near Antarctica to be under it. But this order that you're speaking of, Geoff, is astonishing in the earth. The things that Scott has written about, these distances, is astonishing. And then in the myths, the way the constellations, people have asked me, so does this mean that the constellations were put there by God in order to do this? Because they're just incredible. I don't know. I don't know whether it was, fortuitous or providential. It's like Scott's wonderful progression. Was it first he started with coincidence, then you went to
no, it was
some sort of
it was conspiracy first, and then later it was like coincidence, and then consciousness and providence.
And then
I was riffing off of a book cover I did for my anthology, which was CCCP. It had a cosmonaut. And so I came up with the acronym of that. It's kind of funny.
Well, it really is amazing. It's like, is this providence? Is this the myth system itself is so profound, Geoff, and so multi-layered and so deep, and it works on so many levels, and it also incorporates the planets. But I've found that the stars, the constellations, are even more central. People say, well, Zeus must be associated with Jupiter. Yes, clearly he is, and so is Marduk in the Mesopotamian, but they're also associated with a specific constellation. And I've got some visuals to kind of show, just a brief, because people sometimes have a hard time really grasping what I mean when I say that the world's myths are based on the stars. I've got a couple of visuals to just show, but
please.
The short answer is yes. Short answer is yes. Sure. It's so profound. It's so profound, and I don't know who gave these myths to humanity, but they're a precious treasure given to humanity and preserved in literally every culture around the planet. When people say people say astrotheology, mostly that's limited to trying to find connections with the stories of the Bible to celestial cycles, which they are certainly there. In fact, that number 153 and the number of the fish is in that story of the miraculous catch. And it's actually a Pythagorean ratio. They called it the number of the fish that relates to the Vesica Piscis. I was trying to find the exact
I think it's and things, but 265 to 153 is the width and the height of the Vesica.
265 to 163. It was known to Archimedes as the measure of the fish. And if you divide 265 by 153, you get 1.732. I had a blog post. 3. Yeah. And it works out to the measure of the Vesica, which the Vesica itself, I'm not telling sacred geometry experts anything new here, but it's like this.
No, I'm always learning. This is fascinating. Yeah.
It's like a mixture between two spheres. And what are we if not a mixture of two spheres, a physical and a spiritual? And so we are ourselves in this wonderful dual, not to be dualistic, which I'm not dualistic. They're melded together such that they're so intertwined that it's inseparable. And it's just wonderful how all these things all fit together, and you can come to these by all these different pathways, by mathematics, by geometry, by astrology or astronomy.
In my most recent book, Sacred Geometry, which is about philosophy, it has this idea of the epistemology that Geoff would be familiar with, of having the world mind and the soul mind joined together kind of in a Vesica Piscis, where they're interacting with each other. Like the world mind would be everything that we understand of physics, of the things we can weigh and measure. And the soul mind would be an invisible domain where actually our minds are it's how we interface with the inanimate physical, if you like. And I think it's fascinating that the myths always have these two realms that interface with each other, So it's like our ancestors really understood this.
It is so profound.
And it's really a very, very powerful way of explaining things and making sense of reality. And I'm doing my part to try to, give my theory out there and kind of make it rational, make it understandable. But it's really just an echo of these ancient myths and what they were saying, And
absolutely. And I'm just pointing people to the myths, people.
And have you studied myths, David, from different cultures around the world? From different parts of the world, different times in the world. Is that part of your study,
yes.
Or is it? Because I'd love to ask you, like, maybe a few of your favorites, or what one that jumps out. Because I'm kind of trying to. I'm not a mythologist. I don't know many myths except. In Ireland, we have a very rich mythology, actually.
Yes.
There's a beautiful, I just remembered from growing up as a kid, and there was things like the 288 Danann and Finn McCool, and there was these, the story of the hero, and very reminiscent of like all the hero myths you'd see on Star Wars and all the rest of it, But have you studied it from like culture to culture to culture, and there's been these commonalities that you've discovered where there seems to be like the same pattern almost seems to be emerging. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. That beautifully put, Geoff. It is the same pattern across cultures, and the ancients appear to have recognized that. They would say, oh, here we are. The Romans would write, we're fighting the Germans, and they have this god named such and such. That's our Hercules. Or they have this god named such and such. That's Mars. They'll come right out and say, well, that's Mars. Like they know that one's associated with, that's got the same characteristics as this principle of Mars, or this principle of Zeus or Jupiter for the Romans. But they had a connection between, like, Osiris and Dionysus. They would just assume that you agreed with them when they said, well, they call our Dionysus Osiris. No, without any real argument, as if they had to prove it. They would just say, it's quite obvious, isn't it, to everybody?
But with my kind of modern brain, I thought they were just ripping them off. I thought they were just like, oh, they're just ripping off the Greeks. The Romans ripped off the Greeks, but they didn't. They just had their own myths but they're using the same archetypes that are part of the human soul. So of course they're going to resonate in the same 12 or 13 boxes, aren't they?
It's fascinating. And it's even in the Pacific, the ancient sacred stories of China and Japan and the Pacific cultures, the culture that is across the Pacific, with the Maui stories and baby Maui being thrown into the sea foam, just like baby Moses gets placed in the river. I mean, it's clearly a system that's even beyond, it's very difficult to explain. But sorry, Geoff, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No. I was one area I do have a bit of expertise in is psychology. It's an area I've trained in, an area I'm really interested in. And Carl Jung would have been the sort of the founder, I suppose, of the idea of the collective unconscious, which is like where it's the home of the archetypes, So these kind of like, they're like energetic qualities of being or whatever. These archetypes reside, in a place in consciousness, which are accessible to all people across all times, And so if you use the psychological lens to look at the myths, the star stories, which are common across all cultures, as you say, Scott, on one level we could say, oh my God, they're copying each other, but on another level, they're just tapping into the same archetypal truth, which is ever present across all cultures, across all times, So it makes sense to me on that level as well, but I'd love to learn more about the actual myths. It's like, I've never really dive
I can recommend
into
nine books for you.
Yeah.
Well, it just is fascinating.
You've gone deep into this, David. You've really gone deep into this, haven't you? Like, this is your baby. Like, I mean, they're not short books. They're not like little ladybird books. They've got a couple of pages in them, your books. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Scott, for that recommendation. And yes, Geoff, they do total, those 9 books total over 5,000 pages. So I think the Star Myths of the Bible is 766 pages, something like that.
Wow.
Most of them are in the 400s or 500s, but some of them are thinner than that. One of my sons, when he saw it, said, "Dad, you've written a textbook." Nobody wants a textbook, but I am now launching some courses which present it visually, because not everybody wants to sit down with a 700-page book. Although, you know, you can pack a lot more information in a book than a video has its own strengths, but it's a slower and less dense way of presenting material.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to lay it out systematically now in some video courses we can get to later. But I'll show you.
Would you like to share those slides?
Let me share a couple slides to show
that would
people
be great.
What I'm talking about, to can really tie it in. And I just want to go back to that point you made about Jung and the collective unconscious, and so beautiful. And, you know, psychology that's what I've been really, these cutting edge healers recently that I've really been getting into. I'm realizing that some of the very cutting edge psychology practitioners, specifically I'm talking about Dr. Gabor Mate and Dr. Richard Schwartz. They're talking about separation from self and suppression of self by parts. Dr. Richard Schwartz and his internal family systems therapy paradigm that he has discovered. And I love how when you listen to him on podcasts, he always says, you know, how did you get into this? He's always asked, well, I wasn't particularly looking for this. And that's kind of what I feel like too. I wasn't particularly looking for this. It found me. So let me show what I'm talking about. But just to worry or tug on that thought that you made a little bit, just to be obstinate, just a tiny bit. Some of the connections that are worldwide, you could attribute them to, well, we all have this psychology, but some of the connections are so specific and even what we might say obscure, like you wouldn't expect people to just come up with this independently. I do believe there was some sort of an ancient worldwide system, and there was probably some sort of cataclysm or catastrophe, you know, somewhere between Göbekli Tepe and dynastic Egypt, or somewhere way back there. I think this system was very, very ancient because it's already present in the myths of ancient Mesopotamia. The system's already being used in their most ancient texts, like Gilgamesh or Inanna. It's already being referenced in the pyramid texts, which are like the most ancient scripts that we have left from Egypt, talking about Osiris and Isis. They're already using these star myths in the most ancient cultures. India, it's already full blown, but yet in a different format in India than in Mesopotamia than in Egypt. So it's almost like it's already had time to evolve or adapt into different places of the world before these most ancient cultures that we know of. So I believe it does come from maybe some even more ancient source. Some sort of catastrophe maybe happened, and those ancient cultures understood it better than we do, but even they may not have fully understood the original system that got splintered, and they were carrying pieces as these precious broken inheritance that they, you know, this precious vase that they knew belonged to their great grandmother, but it's now in pieces, but they know it's so precious they want to keep it as much as they can and try and tell their kids, well, this vase, look at this piece, it means this. But the originators of that vase, you know, were so far removed that maybe they didn't even know. But I keep talking, I keep saying, let me share my screen, and then I don't.
It's great. It's great to hear. I'm fascinated, David, really fascinated. Yeah. It's wonderful to reconnect, by the way, man. It's been too long.
Yes.
Thank God for podcasts. What a great excuse to reconnect. You know, it's perfect.
Thank you for inviting
the geometer's
me.
Compass. We even got to mention.
That's a cool one.
Oh my God. We had to share these slides.
Yeah, you guys. Well, this is really exciting. You know, geometer. It's really interesting because temple, the Chinese characteristic, character, not characteristic, for a temple is, I believe it is inch earth. It's a combination of inch and earth on the pictogram itself. I used to know this. I've kind of gotten away from studying Chinese characters.
Like geometry is earth measure, right? So it's similar.
Is earth measure.
And
poetry, which is rhythmic speech, which is measured speech, and all the ancient myths are in poetry, which have meter, the geometer's compass, you know, iambic pentameter, or poetry. And the Chinese character for poetry, I'm pretty sure, is temple speech. Temple speech. It's like sacred speech.
I love it.
I could be totally wrong about. Now I'm digging deep into my memory. I haven't thought those thoughts in a little while. But anyway,
hey, it's a cool idea. Anyway, it's a cool idea. If it's not true, it should be.
Well, it is certainly true that all the ancient myths are preserved as verse. Even in the sacred stories that are not written down, they're often in poem form. So there is this measure that is,
even in the words,
worldwide.
in the tempo, in the speech, yes. The pattern of transmission has a pattern as well. I get it.
It's kind of mathematical in a way.
It is mathematical. You can go. You can, and so that's really neat because it's math related to English. We tend to like to separate those out. Oh, I was an English major. Oh, you must not be very good at math then.
Yeah.
But actually, those two that unites them. So I just threw this beautiful picture up to show.
Great picture.
There is evidence around the world for something going on, and much of the evidence is physical. We have these amazing sites around the world that appear to have some kind of harmony. There are ratio connections between the pyramids in Egypt and the pyramids in the Americas, in Central America. There are, ratio connections, and they relate to the precessional numbers like 432 and 108, and they relate to the size of the earth, and so these things show that something was going on. And why I put this up is to say this myth body of evidence stands alongside all of this evidence as yet another body of evidence that there's something worldwide going on in these myths. So this is, I wanted to get into Scott's discussion of Lilith and Ophiuchus and wisdom. This is a different wisdom story, though, I thought I'd start with, because this is pretty astonishing, and it connects kind of to that worldwide and to that young point that you were visiting, Geoff. This is a picture, a depiction of a famous Bible story. Of course, this artist, this is Peter Paul Rubens, who lived in the 1600s. He's clearly painting their outfits in a more 1600s look than, ancient look, if you look at the dresses on the women there. But this is, of course, the famous judgment of a wise judgment. Someone asked for wisdom, and right after that in the Bible, this story comes up. This is Solomon. God comes up to Solomon and says, ask me anything. What do you want? And this is actually a famous pattern in myth around the world too. If you think of King Midas, he was asked, Midas, name it. What do you want? And he chose not so wisely, right? He was foolish. Midas was actually always doing foolish things, like judging the god Apollo in a music contest with a satyr and giving the award to the satyr instead of to the actual god of music. Like Midas, get a grip, man. You're just so foolish all the time. Well, Midas chose foolishly, but Solomon asked for wisdom. Midas, of course, asked for riches. He's already the richest king in the world, but no, I want to touch everything and turn it to gold. Okay, there you go, Midas. Have fun with that one. But this is Solomon. He asked for wisdom. Yeah, he asked for wisdom, and right after that, this story comes of these two mothers who have two babies, but one baby is a dead baby. You can see it at the bottom, and one baby is a living baby. I just want to call attention to this. I don't want to get too into this because we got to get to Lilith and Scott's argument about the 13, but this will relate, I promise. Look at the arch of the baby. You see how the baby that's about to get cut in half is arching vigorously? And babies do that, actually, when they're angry, particularly when you're changing their diaper or something. They'll sometimes arch like, or giving them a bath, a little bath in the sink when they're so small. Now, for viewers who don't know the story, don't worry, the baby does not get cut in half. This is the wisdom of Solomon. He says, the two mothers are arguing over which baby is the dead baby or the live baby belongs to them. And he says, I know, cut the baby in half and give a half. The living one, since you both want to say it's yours, we'll cut it in half and you can each have half.
And of course, the real mother said, no, you can have the baby.
Exactly.
Because
and what does the other mother
loves
say?
The child and doesn't want harm to come to it.
Yes. And the other mother says, no, cut it in half, which literally doesn't make much sense because she was just coming before the king to try and get the baby. And now she's saying, cut it in half. So what is it? This actually is esoteric. It has to do with two mothers. I called it one time the blessing mother and the cursing mother. And we actually, this relates to our higher self. These myths have two mothers often. You can think of Isis and Nephthys in the myths of ancient Egypt. Isis and Nephthys, or sometimes Isis and Hathor, or the two Marys in the Bible. There's often, there's two Marys going around together all the time in the Bible stories. There are two mothers a lot, or there are twins, or there are two births, a second birth, a first birth, and a second birth. This is all esoteric, but you're correct, Scott. The one mother says, don't do it. And Solomon says, okay, stop, don't cut the baby in half. The mother who was going to give it away, give the baby to her. It's obviously her child because she would rather the baby not die. But look at the swordsman here. When I was a kid, I thought Solomon grabbed a sword and was about to cut it in half. But if you read the text, it's very clear he's talking to a swordsman because he says stop. He wouldn't say stop if he was doing it himself, of course. He tells the swordsman, don't cut the child in half. Stop right there. So look at the swordsman is a burly figure, got a little bit of a beard in contrast to Solomon, has a sword arching over his back. These are things I want to point out. Look at the mother. One mother has her arm reaching out. One mother's kind of holding her folds of her. And then look at Solomon. He's got kind of a rod in one hand and he's pointing with his other hand. These are all actually celestial details in the paintings. So this is Peter Paul Rubens. Here's another famous artist you may have heard of named Raphael, famous painter, Renaissance, high Renaissance. Here we have Solomon. Now, do you see any similar details? A baby arching vigorously again? Look at the arch. You can make a beautiful arc with your geometer's compass and make that baby. And look at the women's arms. We've got another kind of outstretched arm, and then we got these kind of two arms. And then we've got a Solomon. Oh, we've got the swordsman, sorry, with his sword again overhead, kind of behind his back, like he's about to just split the baby. And then Solomon is in between two pillars. Two pillars, the pillars of Solomon. So these are, I would argue, celestial details. Even the hand gestures of the different onlookers may well relate to constellations. But let's go to the night sky. Oh, I didn't mean for Moses to be there yet, but there's Moses with his two arms upraised. I've got it. I should have proofread this deck first. But anyway, there's your constellations in the sky. I've got a few things that should be coming in later, but just don't look at those. But can you see the Milky Way? I should have brightened it up. I wish I'd brightened it up, but you can see the Milky Way running up.
I can see it. I can see it. Yeah.
I hope that viewers will look at this on a bigger screen, maybe than a smartphone if possible. But the Milky Way does have a dark rift going through it, almost like, well, in some cultures, it's mythologized as a birth canal. The Maya famously called this the birth canal. John Major Jenkins, the late John Major Jenkins, who wrote a lot about the Maya calendar, talks about the birth canal. But it goes right along this brightest part of the Milky Way, the bright part, right in the kind of the center of your screen or down towards the bottom near the horizon. So let's show Ophiuchus, since we've been talking about Ophiuchus. Oh, I'll bring in our Raphael picture. And okay, I'll get to Ophiuchus in a second. This is not Ophiuchus. This is a different constellation, but it's the constellation Hercules. Can you see the outline there? This is the outline as per H.A. Rey, and I won't go into the whole long story, but H.A. Rey is a famous author who, along with his wife Margaret, wrote the books we know of as the Curious George series. Wrote and illustrated Curious George. Also wrote a book in 1952 called The Stars, A New Way to See Them, with this wonderful outlining system. This is the outline of Hercules that H.A. Rey, and guess what? His system in this book, it is the ancient system. You can see it in ancient artwork. I'll show some examples later if we have time, but look at the powerful, menacing kind of posture of Hercules, menacingly holding the sword up over like his head. Big square head. Often Hercules figures will have a big square beard, like Hercules himself or Heracles, or Zeus with his thunderbolt. So Hercules figures will often have a powerful weapon. Thor, you can think of Thor. Geoff, I don't know if you're familiar with the Dada, an Irish Dagda. It's spelled Dagda.
Dagda. Oh yes, yeah, I am familiar. Yeah, Dagda.
He has a powerful
Yeah.
club. He has a powerful club, and he also has a magic harp. You know, the harp is the symbol of Ireland. I didn't
That's
sketch
right.
it in. I should have sketched it in, but just above Hercules, the word Hercules, there's a little constellation there called Lyra, the lyre. Lyra or Lyra, the lyre. That is a beautiful harp in the sky. You know, there are different figures associated with a harp in the Bible, like David, who is also associated with this constellation of Hercules. That's why he plays the harp. And the Dada or the Dagda has a harp and a big club and a big beard. Well, he's probably related to this figure. Oh, and he has a daughter named Brigid.
Brigid, yes, a very powerful female saint.
She's descended from the Dagda. She has 3 candles or 3 aspects to her in a lot of ways. Well, just below Hercules, there's a figure just below Hercules. But before I get to that, Hercules figures will often be grasping something arc-shaped. So here in this painting, ignore Moses for a moment. Look over in the lower right. We've got a powerful figure with a sword grasping an arching baby. Now that arc is the northern crown, Corona Borealis. Would you naturally think of that as a baby in the sky? No. A crown, that's what it's called. Yes. I could see that as a crown that goes like a wreath that goes around your forehead, or a diadem or something, or a necklace. It appears in myth often as a necklace, like a necklace that gets stolen. The wife of or the goddess Freya has a beautiful necklace, and Loki steals it in the myths of the Norse myths. But this looks like a necklace, looks like a crown, but in myths around the world, it also plays a baby, which is astonishing. And look at how Hercules, if you just imagine one more line, Hercules could be holding that arc. And sometimes Hercules, like in paint, I could show some Greek artwork where Hercules is in that exact same posture, Heracles, the hero Heracles, deep knee bend, you know, square shaped head. He often has that kind of lion shaped headdress that he wears. And he's grabbing like the crest of a helmet, like the arching crest of a helmet on his opponent. He's about to cut their head off, and he's grabbing their helmet crest, and it's arched just like this. I didn't go into that, but there's a myth in the myths of Maui, where Maui gets thrown into the sea foam, and then his grandfather, his powerful grandfather, pulls him up out of the sea foam. This is, again, I would argue, the Hercules figure pulling up the baby is connected to that Corona Borealis. The Hercules figure is Maui's grandfather that saves him, and then he actually hangs Maui up by the rafters to dry off because he's been in the ocean foam getting cold. He hangs him up above the fire to warm him up, to warm up the baby. Well, the fire could be the Milky Way, smoke of the fire rising there. But not to get too off, I wanted to show that it is worldwide. And I really don't see how that is collective unconscious right there. That is some kind of a system, the remnants of which are still around the world, because I don't look at Northern Crown and say, oh yeah, psychologically, everyone's going to relate that to an arching baby. Maybe you could make that argument, but
too specific. You're right.
It's very obscure.
Yeah.
It's not what most people would look up there and say, oh, I'm going to make a myth about that Northern Crown. Let's do a necklace. Yes, I could see that happening around the world without any connection. But anyway, I mentioned that Brigid is the daughter of the Dagda, or often a figure who is descended from Hercules, will be right below Hercules. Now we finally get, this is the outline of Ophiuchus. So not many people are familiar with these outlines. It may be conspiracy. It really seems like we've been taught the wrong outlines. Even today, if you look on Wikipedia or a cell phone app, the outlines for Hercules will be horrendous, or for Ophiuchus, it won't really help you see the connection to the myth. But can you see how Ophiuchus is kind of a triple looking figure? It's got a central body that's like a tombstone shape or a house shape or an obelisk shape. And then there's this flanked by these 2 serpents holding a serpent. And so Scott wisely and insightfully many years ago said, Lilith, she's always surrounded by a serpent in some of these depictions. I've got a picture of her in a minute, but also I believe that Brigid in Irish mythology has characteristics that are associated with Ophiuchus, specifically this kind of triplicate, triple candles.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in? I don't
Yeah.
want to stop your flow, David, but just with
Not at
Brigid,
all.
you know, my grandmother was called Brigid. My sister's daughter is called Brigid. Brigid is a hugely popular Irish saint that we all adore and revere. And if I'm right, like there's a Saint Brigid's cross, which is made a very special type of cross, this fourfold cross, which has a square in the center, very particular type of cross associated with it. But my question is she linked to the beginning of spring? I think Saint Brigid's Day here is the first day of spring. I think I might be wrong about that, but I'm just wondering if in the stars, is there any way, you know, is there any way in this in terms of the calendar, you know, does it line up with the spring equinox or anything like that? I don't know.
That's a good question. I'd have to research and get a little. I haven't really done a book on the Irish myths or the myths of and I've kind of been saving them because, you know, I did my master's thesis in literature on Beowulf, which is of course Anglo-Saxon. I love Beowulf. It was one of my favorite poems in college, actually. I was introduced to it by this wonderful professor who was a professor of literature at West Point. I went to the military academy, and actually when I was at Ranger School, which is like one of the harder schools in the Army, you get these little 8-hour breaks where you can go buy food and stuff. Most of the time you're starving and wet and cold. And on my 8-hour break, I
read Beowulf.
I got a copy of Beowulf. Yeah, I got a copy of Beowulf to like inspire me to be tougher. Like, you know, don't give up, man. Anyway,
sorry, I didn't interrupt your flow, but please keep going. Yeah,
but I've kind of been saving, you know, the British Isles, and the Knights of the Round Table are connected to this system as well.
But it would be a fair family. Like Brigid would be in the family of Ophiuchus as well.
Yes,
Would it? That's a fair?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And
great. Good to know.
From the Dagda. You see, if the Dagda is Hercules, could Ophiuchus be said in the sky to be descended from Hercules?
Yeah, definitely.
Right
definitely. This map. Yeah.
Ophiuchus's foot, the one that you're saying, that's the part that sticks down into the ecliptic.
Exactly.
It's fascinating that, you know, that's Sagittarius right there, and that's Scorpio. So the arrow of Sagittarius and the stinger of Scorpion and the foot of Ophiuchus are all pointing at the galactic center.
Yes, that is absolutely right. The galactic core. And so that little triangle that you just said, those 3 little constellations. So I've drawn in the Zodiac line. And this is what I was talking about as well with this, you know, it's very synchronistic because I was just talking about this. So there's 2 different axes being kind of sketched out here. One is that plane of the table of the sun and the earth. The sun goes through the zodiac: Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius. If you draw a line through all of those, you get the zodiac. But there's this different axis, that's the Milky Way going straight up. And there's Ophiuchus, and there's Hercules, who's a figure that's associated with God and the divine. And even so, Ophiuchus is like a bridge between our plane of the, you know, we all have these zodiac characteristics. Astrology ascribes, you know, different strengths and weaknesses to each of these different signs. This is the plane of our earth in a metaphorical, esoteric sense. This is what Hamlet's Mill actually, they come right out and say it, that an earth is defined by the 4 solstices, the 2 solstices and 2 equinoxes of any different age.
But it's also defined by the ecliptic's intersection with the galactic midplane right here.
There it is.
That is the Golden Gate.
That's right. That's right. And I don't really talk about that as much. I've had people talk about the Golden Gate or ask me about the Golden Gate, but you're right. This is all, I mean, see, I love that you were bringing this entirely another body of knowledge. This is such a critical juncture. So I'm trying to actually weave it back to Brigid really quickly. This is the turning point. This is actually the turning point of the year where the sun gets its lowest and then turns back up in the year. So it's not at the spring equinox so much as it's at like the pivot point of the year where the sun finally turns back around. Now that shifts over the ages, but this is the point of the crossing between this this path that goes upwards, the Milky Way, and this path that's kind of the plane of the sun, moon, and planets.
It's like you had a horizontal and a vertical kind of.
Like a horizontal and a vertical, and Ophiuchus participates in both. That's the big point, is that Ophiuchus is like
has her tippy toe in the plane.
Yes,
down most here, of her.
Yes, down here with us, and yet not with us. In the world, but not of it, is a Christian formulation.
I love it, and it's so cool that it's her feet as well. So I keep calling Ophiuchus a lady now because I'm linking her to Brigid. But I always say, like, you know, like with this whole dance of, like, you know, having to pay our taxes and know our zip code and do the school run and all, you know, we have to be in the world, you know, but also there's this kind of like hidden dimension, which is far vaster, where there's so much more going on to the reality. If we open to it, we can experience a much richer experience of being here. And it feels like, to me, it's like having a foot in both worlds. That's the analogy I use all the time, but I've never seen this so literally. Is a foot in both worlds, you know, like
Geoff, that's your yoga of the cross. This is where the cross meets, right in the middle.
Exactly what it is. It's the yoga of the cross. Exactly right.
Well, and,
you know,
and Patanjali,
so I'm digging this.
Patanjali, actually, if you're into the yoga stories, Patanjali, who gave us Ashtanga, is kind of a figure who has serpentine legs. Okay, right? In some depictions. He's got like the coils of a serpent down below and the body of a man up above, which is, again, Ophiuchus, which we'll see. But so Ophiuchus could play a male figure and a female figure, but is often associated with wisdom. But you said it so poetically and beautifully just there, Geoff, that I'm glad this is being recorded so that we can go back and hear that. The way you said it is beautiful. But also look at his feet, or her feet. One is in the Milky Way and one is not. And there is a passage in Revelation chapter, I want to say 10, where there's an angel who has one foot, the right foot in the sea and the left foot on the land. That is Ophiuchus again. And so which one is Solomon is what I wanted to ask. If Hercules is the swordsman who's about to cut the baby in half, and the baby is
got to be somebody with their arm outstretched, you know?
Yes, you would think so. And maybe holding a wand, like in one of the
could it be Virgo? You know?
Yeah, good question. Actually, it's Ophiuchus. Solomon, the two pillars, the temple itself is associated. So David is associated with Hercules, who's descended from David, who builds the temple, Solomon. Solomon is associated with wisdom in between the two pillars, Ophiuchus. And you can see the two pillars on either side of that central body of Ophiuchus, right? The two pillars of the temple. I mean, it looks like a temple too. Solomon is definitely associated with Ophiuchus, but it's a good point that you bring up. I think I've found lots of evidence, scriptural evidence, to associate Solomon with Ophiuchus and David with Hercules. But you bring up Virgo. So Virgo and Sagittarius are actually esoterically the two mothers in myth. And down by Sagittarius, there's another arc. This is the Southern Crown,
that's
Corona
the dead baby,
Borealis.
right?
It's the dead baby. Yes, but the babies have been switched. You see, it's the dead baby has actually been put next to the second birth mother. So Virgo on the zodiac. This is an esoteric system. I'll just jump out, go back. Let me go to this. I didn't label it all, but I didn't think we've already probably gone over your time, but Virgo.
No, this is great. We've got time. You're doing great, David. I'm loving
Virgo
this.
is like
Don't
the
worry.
first birth. Thank you. Yeah. On this wheel, this all has esoteric significance. There's a language going on. The first birth is the plunge down into this body, and that happens at Virgo. She's on the right. She's at the 3 o'clock position on this wheel. This is just one way of sketching out the zodiac. This is actually from 1613. But
you
that's
were
the
talking
first
about
birth.
this with your Halloween video, I think, about like plunging underneath is like the descent of the spirit into matter.
Yes, and also the suppression of self, of higher self. And Ophiuchus is that wisdom that connects to higher self. And so we'll tie this into Lilith, and we'll tie this in just a moment. I just briefly, there are two mothers, and they're actually 3 apart. So if you go from Virgo is just above the X on the right-hand side. So just to orient, I'm rushing a bit. I shouldn't force it by rushing it, but not everybody's familiar with this diagram. It is the path of the sun through the year. And I've drawn a horizontal line to separate days longer than nights on the upper half, days shorter than nights on the lower half.
Mm-hmm.
And in the spring, we have an equinox or equinox, and, you know, alignments all over the place in Ireland, right? Aligned to the different cross-quarter days and to the different equinoctial days.
It's huge. It's huge here. Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Huge.
so the sun, when it crosses that line, it's either crossing upwards, going towards the days longer, or crossing downwards, going towards the nights longer. And you would think that nights longer, oh, that must be death and darkness and, oh, you know, where we go after no, that's actually when we're born. That's where we plunge down into the dark part. You know, the upper part is spirit and not connected to a body. When we get stuffed into a body, so to speak, just to put it, you know, kind of crudely, that's when we plunge down into matter. Well, that happens at the downward crossing point, which is on the 3 o'clock position, if we were to think of a clock, or the X on the right as you're looking at the screen. And so just before that X, that's the sign of Virgo, the constellation that the sun is moving through. The procession gets this a little bit more complicated, so we won't go into that. But Virgo is like the first birth. She presides over the first birth. Now, in the story of Solomon, the babies are born, specifically, the text tells us, 3 days apart. Well, if you count 1, 2, 3 signs down from Virgo, so
you're down
below
to
the line,
yeah,
you get to Sagittarius. That's the second mother. That's the second birth. That's the turning point. That's not the physical birth. That must be the spiritual birth. That must be the rebirth. So it's interesting that, you know, Geoff, you asked, is Brigid associated with spring? Well, I don't know, but she's definitely associated with reconnection with self, reconnection with higher self or deeper self that's been, psychologically speaking, shoved down underneath the ground by childhood trauma or by other entanglements of this earth. We get separated from who we truly are, and we suppress that part of us. This is what Dr. Gabor Mate talks about so much as leading to addiction, as completely connected to addiction is an attempt to deal with this separation from self. So the reconnection with self, the second birth, is illustrated or dramatized in the myths this way. And so now we can go back to our stars and say, oh, it's a second mother. So the dead baby's been put down by the second birth that's the birth into spirit, but they've been switched, you see. And so Solomon says, I'll figure this out. Let's cut the baby in half. And the one who says, oh, don't, you know, I'll take the dead baby. It's okay. And Solomon says, I've seen through the riddle, and now I know whose baby is whose. Let me sort this all out. So this story is it's so vivid. Oh, I went to a different one. That's okay. Let me just bring in Lilith, because that's where Scott wanted to go.
There's Apollo and Python.
Yeah, there's Apollo and Python, because you mentioned the Pythia or the Pythia, however it's.
Could I just jump in here, David?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to, Absolutely. You know, I mean, I'm really loving your emphasis on, you know, that these myths are the particular examples you're giving us here. You know, to do with Brigid, to do with Ophiuchus. Is that pronounced correctly? Ophiuchus.
Yes, it can also be pronounced Ophiuchus. Dictionary says both ways.
So, but this idea of like connection with higher wisdom, you know, this idea that like we live most of our lives on this kind of horizontal plane, you know, like literally and figuratively. I sometimes talk about how when we open our eyes in the morning and we go out into the world and we interact with people and places and things, and we're of the world, you know, but we also have this kind of interiority, this kind of like inner world, which is kind of like the source of our inner wisdom or our true self, or who we are at our deepest levels, is kind of like behind closed eyelids, which I call the vertical, you know. And so I'm really loving that the example you chose to share with us today speaks exactly, which is kind of like my mantra for life. No wonder we've so much in common, you know what I mean? Because essentially what Scott and I are trying to do in our workshops and so on is ultimately like connect people with that side of themselves, you know, that there's more to reality than we confront through our five senses and being stuck in the horizontal all the time, you know. When we go vertical, magic happens. And so you're bringing a kind of a whole new octave to what we do anyway, you know. It's kind of this is written in the stars, literally. You know, it's fascinating, you know. So thanks for choosing this particular example. Keep going. I'm loving it.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you for those great words, Geoff. You put it beautifully. It's very poetic, and that we all have access to that at all times.
Yeah.
And I believe the myths are there to dramatize that, to remind us, because when we disconnect from self because of trauma, we actually suppress memory of the disconnection because it's so painful. This is what, I'm not a psychologist. I always take pains to say that I'm not a psychologist. I'm pointing to the psychologists who are talking about this based on their experience and their training and their knowledge. I'm pointing to the myths and saying, look at this wonderful resource that is illustrating. It's quite clear to me that the myths are working on many different levels, but this is a central theme of, you don't even know it, but you're ignorant of your true self. There's a passage in one of the Gnostic Gospels, it was the Nag Hammadi text that was not included, where Jesus is talking to Thomas and says, since you are my twin and true brother, this is Jesus talking to Thomas, since you are my twin and true brother, it is not fitting for you to be ignorant of yourself. Whoa.
Wow.
What are you saying, Jesus? Are you calling me ignorant of myself? Yes, because we're in that condition of, we've suppressed ourselves so much that we've even suppressed the suppression. And so when somebody says to you higher self, typically one of the other parts Dr. Schwartz calls our different personalities. You know, we have multiple personalities, we have multiple parts. The parts that are protecting us from that, they're trying to play a positive role to protect us from that trauma that we experienced or that separation. But they will swoop in and make fun of that concept, higher self, or scorn, you know, be sarcastic about it, because they don't want to even bring up the memory of that. It's like, yes, I know I'm suppressing my higher self. I'm doing that for a reason. It's so painful. Don't even talk to me about it. And we can do that to ourselves, and we can have parts that imitate the higher self. Dr. Schwartz talks about self-like parts that pretend to be the self. Like, so spiritual now.
Hey, I'm loving. No. I'm loving this, David, and I'm also loving your emphasis on trauma. You know, and I want to try and do a cool trip here, right? I'm wondering if I can link what you're speaking about, David, about separation and about how that leaves a kind of an imprint of trauma on all of us, right? I'm trying to link it back to something Scott did in Secrets in Plain Sight. So, be alert, Scott. This is coming around to you, you know. So, but I agree with you. You know, we all have experienced separation of whatever kind. Even in birth psychology, they talk about like the very process of being born, just anatomically, like just physically being born is really traumatizing, actually. So we all are left with this kind of birth trauma, and then whatever happens to you in your life, in your they call it postnatal biography, you know, from the day you were born, for good or for bad. But then if you go deeper and deeper into like the kind of the Buddhist koan of like form and emptiness, right? That like this idea that in order for anything to come into manifestation at all, you know, it has to actually become separate from the source, you know, the kind of primordial soup, which is pre-manifestation of any kind. And that's just like, you know, like form is emptiness and emptiness is form, and so ultimately we are all separated from the oneness. You know, at one stage we were all just connected in this kind of like utopian bliss where we're dissolved into the all, we're one with everything, right? So being in manifestation, being like a manifested being, it's separate by its very nature. And then that separation leads to all kinds of traumas. And we are on a journey of trying to integrate those things and overcome them. Okay. So that's just kind of part of life, I suppose. But Scott, I wanted to loop this back to you, because didn't you speak in Secrets in Plain Sight about this really cool myth star myth, which was to do with the Golden Gate Bridge. You just got me thinking of it there when David mentioned the Golden Gate, which is quite cool. It's like that ecliptic where it intersects the Milky Way, I think. And it was to do with the Golden Gate Bridge, and it had to do with the journey of the soul into manifestation.
Yeah,
correct. I hope I'm on track here. Yeah, please jump in.
A refresher is that there's two gates. There's a silver gate over by Taurus, between the horns of Taurus. That's the gate of birth. And so your soul comes like into the earth system through there, right? And then you have your earthly life. And then after you die, you go out through the Golden Gate towards your journey onto the galactic center. And so the earth is kind of this pit stop that you make. You can imagine your soul like coming from outside the galaxy, entering our system through the Silver Gate. You got your earthly life, and then you leave through the Golden Gate. It's really cool.
It's really cool. And is there pillars linked to that? The silver pillar, the gold pillar? I don't know. I'm just thinking Solomon's pillars there.
Well, that's like Jachin and Boaz, that like strength and beauty. They're sort of like the hemispheres of the brain as well. You can think of it that way. Or you can think of it as Ida and Pingala, sort of relating in a way to Ophiuchus with the body and the serpent wrapping around it. It's like it's almost like a wire wrapped around a core that forms this kind of inductor.
Yeah, I remember that being really cool.
Kundalini energy rising up the spine, is kind of in a way what Ophiuchus evokes in my mind. Is
and
this
that,
kind of
tying that, I totally, and you just connected it to the Milky Way path when you say the Silver Gate and the Golden Gate are two, the Milky Way runs as it's a total ring, of course, but that is the spirit path or the soul path or the, this rising. It's at
and it looks like a river. It looks like there's a path from the Earth-centric perspective. We're looking at the disk of the Milky Way, but from us, it kind of looks like it could look like a river. It could look like an arch in some ways, arching all the way across the horizon down to the other side. And so
it plays that in so many different myths. And in fact, I briefly landed on that Apollo picture. There's a river running right between Apollo and the Python in the picture. But, we've covered so many wonderful things. Do you want me to show some Lilith, or do you want to?
Well, actually, David, do you know what? I've got a question I'd love to launch into the mix here, right? Because I'm sensing, right, in terms of the depth of your work and the 9 books and the 5,000 pages, this goes deep, your work, and it's really admirable. The level of depth you've gone to in your work, to be honest, but I just got struck by a thought here, okay? And it's similar to when we're working on geometry. I should speak for myself. When I'm working on geometry, I tend to get very exhilarated very quickly, right? And I begin to find these correspondences. And I call, this is quite left brain. So I'll go, oh my God, that's so cool that it's 2160 is the diameter of the moon. And then there's 864 is the diameter of the sun. And then I'll do all these kind of correspondence between the numbers of the precession and how that maps back onto the world. And the more the rabbit hole deepens, the more kind of almost like obsessive and hyper I become as I'm churning all these ideas in my mind, and I kind of feel the faster it gets, it's like I'm nearly there, like one more step on down the rabbit hole, and I'm going to know the mysteries of the universe. It's just a little bit deeper, right? And I'm charging onward, trying to know the answer to why is Fibonacci rippling through DNA, and I'm like, come on. And then I get to a point, right, where I can't work it all out with that level of mind, that seeking mind that I bring to it. And I always hit this kind of, I would call it like a welcome burnout point. And I use the analogy of like a drop of water on a very, very hot frying pan, where that part of my brain just goes like, and I have to kind of surrender to, I just do not know the answers to the mystery of the universe, And sometimes if I'm lucky, in my lucky moments, I'll get brought to a place that's outside of that seeking self that I have. And I'll just be like, Oh God, I keep on forgetting that. Like, I just have to shut myself up and be in the moment. You know what I mean? I could be looking at a rainbow, or I could be like making a mandala, and it's a different state of consciousness that I get into. You know, and I'm just curious. You know, like, as in your work, you know, you spoke about looking at the stars, and I'm curious, like, you know, so there's this left brain, the 5,000 pages. Have you had moments where all of that almost becomes secondary, and you're just like awed out by the majesty of that which we will never be able to fully know? You know, I'd love you to speak to that, or do I just sound like a mad
Oh,
ranting Irish man here?
Yeah. Well, since we're stereotyping Irishmen, is very poetic. It's very
thank
poetic.
you.
Yeah. Well, you can't take credit for it because, you know, all Irishmen are just naturally poetic, right? I'm stereotyping. No, it was very poetic, and it was beautifully said. And you asked about me personally. Yes, I'm always in that struggle. So that second birth is almost, to me, like, you know, we have this literalistic Christian use of the word second birth. Like, once you have the second birth, everything's all okay, and, you know, you're great. Second births appear in myths around the world. And to me, it is like the recognition of self, the recognition of the existence of self. And then there's the struggle after that, because it's not like, oh, I have self. Great. From now on, in all my dealings with others, I will be from my true self at all times, and none of my doubts will get in the way, and none of my protective parts and addictions and, you know, adaptive behaviors that I have developed over time will ever plague me ever again. You know, wonderful.
I'm free.
Yeah. I'm going to act like a wise Kung Fu master in every single situation like this. The guy who knows exactly what to do and never loses his temper. Perfect. Wrong. It doesn't happen that way for me.
Me too.
That egoic kind of seeking for wisdom, I think, is beautiful, perfect segue to just rapidly. So yes, I experienced that. But I do get messages what I would have to attribute to self, to something higher, where I'm struggling with a connection intellectually. Like, what could this myth mean? This happened to me very specifically, and I've referred to it a lot because it really was astonishing to me. I was trying to figure out the Shem, Ham, and Japheth story. And I actually just did an interview about that, and you can see. But I was struggling with how could these brothers, what could be the brothers walking backwards with a sheet? And I couldn't figure it out. And I went to bed thinking about it. And I woke up the next morning not thinking about it. And as I was in the shower, actually, which is strangely enough kind of a time when it's like we're naked, but we're not really thinking about, you know, like all our protective mechanisms that would normally make us embarrassed or ashamed are not kicking in. We're just kind of, it's like a time to reflect.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the answer was there. It's not like it came to me. It's not like an angel handed it to me or any sort of, it's like, oh, I know the answer. But I hadn't been thinking about it consciously. In fact, I'd been unconscious for 8 hours or however long I was asleep. And yet the answer like presented itself when I wasn't thinking about it, as if like from the gods. Whoa, they gave me the answer.
Wow.
But it's like yourself. It's like quiet down, chattering mind, and the answer will be there. I've had those kinds of experiences. And I really do want to relate that to this question of wisdom. You know, I brought up the Solomon because Solomon is definitely associated with wisdom. I showed Moses has a staff that turns into a serpent. Moses is associated with Ophiuchus. And in fact, Ophiuchus is standing right next to the Milky Way and that pathway across the Milky Way. Moses
the Red
holds his
Sea.
staff out. Yes.
Yeah.
He throws his staff down and it turns into a serpent. Sometimes he puts a serpent on a brazen pole and lifts it up. So Ophiuchus figures are associated with serpents entwining around, and often with a staff or something. But I did want to just show a few Ophiuchus figures for us.
You know what? Speaking with you, David, and I got this when we met you first. You know, there's some kind of resonance between us. You know, where you're kind of out there on your own, you know, like pushing the envelope with the work you're doing, you know, you're seeing these patterns. I think that's what we have in common. It's like there's a pattern. You see this pattern and then you see it everywhere, you know, and it's kind of similar to the geometry. Like we see this pattern and then we see it everywhere, you know, and you just go like, wow, and it just keeps going, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's really similar actually what we're doing, you know what I mean? And what I'm loving about I'd love this to go a layer deeper. You know, that like these stories that are written onto the stars in myth, right? Um, like I know they're archetypal and I know they cross all cultures across all times, but it does make you ponder um, where are they coming from, doesn't it?
It's amazing. And just like you just said, the patterns that you're seeing in sacred geometry, I don't doubt that you ask yourselves the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
how, who, what, who, where, why?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's, you know, it's attributed to divine sources because it's just so profound. You know, the scriptures, these myths, where did they come from? It is astonishing. And it's almost so unbelievable that people like here's another similarity of what we're doing. I mean, the things that Scott shows in Secrets in Plain Sight, or the things that you see in these geometric connections that you were just talking about with the sun and the moon, it almost makes my mind rebel and say, well, maybe NASA is lying to us and pulling up, these numbers, like, can the moon really be a precessional number of miles wide and the sun be another precessional number of miles wide?
Yeah.
It just makes, the mind just says, impossible, unbelievable. It's so beyond the conventional paradigm that it just astonishes.
Yeah.
It just staggers your mind. Like, I totally agree, but I agree. We're looking at these patterns. It's almost like we're all looking at the same thing from different directions. Like we've come up, we've come to this beautiful clearing in the forest that's on top of a mountain, and it's filled with wonderful things. And we're all looking at it, and I'm like, hey, how did you get here? Oh, I came up this path, this kind of geometric path. Oh, hey, I came a different way. I came up here by this myth path.
Yeah.
But we're all looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
Or someone come up by number.
Yeah, it really feels that way. So anyway, David, the floor is yours. You wanted to show us something.
Let me show this. Well, you're talking about what I would call almost like a dichotomy or a struggle between what we might call false wisdom and real wisdom, or that welcome
exactly
burnout
right.
that you said.
Yeah.
This kind of
the welcome
like
burnout.
a striving wisdom versus true wisdom or something.
Yeah. And you know what? I mean, I'll just speak to that while you're getting your slides ready. There's this idea of any transformation of any kind is always linked to this kind of letting go of the false self, and then surrendering that false self to a kind of a truer, more innate wisdom somewhere,
I think it has to do with expanding your boundary from your egoic self to your higher self. And you it sounds like you got that in the shower, in a sense of just letting go of your egoic self for a moment, and then all of a sudden the complete answer to your question is right there.
Yes, I totally agree with that interpretation, except that I would say I used to think of it in those exact terms that you just said, except now I think it's the egoic selves. See all those zodiac signs? We're all multiple parts. This is Dr. Richard Schwartz's IFS, internal family systems paradigm, that when I discovered that after Dr. Gabor Mate, talked about it and they had conversations together, I said, this is brilliant. We have these multiple different parts that have different skills and strengths. And it's not that we don't want that part of us that, is thinking and sometimes can overthink, but what we want it to do is be in control of, under the coaching of this higher figure, the higher self. We don't want it to be steering the ship. We want higher self to be steering the ship. But all those parts down on the zodiac line are often trying to be the coach of the team, or be steering the car instead of handing it over to the higher self. So they will try and imitate the higher self or try and model that wisdom. So I showed Solomon as a wisdom figure associated with Ophiuchus. Athena, she comes out of the head of Zeus. There's Zeus up above, Hercules. Athena is beyond doubt associated with Ophiuchus. I don't have the evidence here to show it, but she carries a spear instead of a rod or a staff like Moses. There's Moses with his hands held up by two people.
But
he's associated with Ophiuchus.
He's a descendant of Zeus, just like Brigid is a descendant of
Dagda, yes. Yeah. And so Athena comes right out of the head of Zeus, full grown. There she is, full grown. She's an Ophiuchus figure. And she's true wisdom. Whereas Ares, and she's a war goddess, but for righteousness. Ares is like impulsive war god. So there's like a negative aspect, but Athena is a positive aspect. But there are negative aspects to Ophiuchus. So this system is so complex. Now Lilith, I'm not saying she's negative. I'm not super familiar with, ancient scriptures talking about Lilith. I really, there's traditions, there's Talmudic traditions that relate to Lilith. So I haven't studied her that much, but I am convinced that you're right, Scott, that she is an Ophiuchus figure. Is she positive wisdom? Is she negative wisdom? Yes, I think she is positive. She's this, she doesn't want to be subservient, in the tradition. And therefore she gets replaced by Eve. You talked about it in that wonderful blog post.
Well, she's been eclipsed by Eve in that we forget. Few people know about Lilith, and that she was Adam's first wife.
And so she could be higher self.
She was the original first woman, first lady.
First lady.
And then they somehow, this is why I think patriarchy comes in a way, because she was eclipsed by Eve, who is a subservient figure who is made from Adam's rib, and so Lilith is like, oh, we're not going to talk about Lilith. She's actually the equal of Adam.
Yes.
And that's why I think it has this kind of suppression thing going on.
So I believe that the ancient scriptures are positive and for the healing of trauma, but I totally agree that they have been twisted into, and we have a garbage truck going by. I don't know if you hear it or not.
In a way, it's kind of like H.A. Rey revealing the real constellations to us, whereas we have this wrong constellations in a lot of cases drawn that we think are the constellations, but they don't make sense with the myths.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like there's someone who is using, sometimes I say it's like if a psychologist really knew your deepest mechanisms and workings of how the mind and patterns, could that psychologist do a lot of damage if they were malevolent? Oh, probably much more damage than
But it might just be their ignorance rather than a concerted effort for some kind of conspiracy. I think it's probably more based in just the lack of knowledge.
Could be.
I'm fascinated with this linking, between Ophiuchus, Brigid, Athena, that they are all the same archetype basically across different mythologies. Is that right, David?
I believe a strong case can be made that they're all connected to Ophiuchus. And so they are exhibiting the same characteristics, and archetype is a perfect word for it. I can't help myself. Can I jump in just a little bit on Athena? Absolutely,
because she is a figure that is so lined up with a very particular geometry, which is the number 7. In that lovely book a guy called Michael Schneider wrote called Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, is a beautifully accessible book. He speaks of how Athena is born out of the crown of Zeus, and that she's kind of like a virgin born in that regard. She's synonymous with the virgin archetype as well. And the number 7 can't be born by division or multiplication out of any number beyond 1 and 7 in the decad. And so, these principles of geometry just fit perfectly onto the principles of the mythologies as well, so it's so cool, this mirroring that happens between geometry and mythology, which I've never really considered, you know. But that Athena one is one that really is easy to get because there's an archetypal shape called the web of Athena, and it's all based on the number seven, which is, and again, seven is elusive. Seven is the hidden, the invisible, the mysterious. Things that show up in seven can't be seen, like the seven colors of the spectrum, the seven notes in the octave before the same note is repeated. It's seven speaks to, it's not tangible, it's elusive, it's hidden, it's mysterious, you know.
Just like
which is that
Ophiuchus is
Just
there,
like
but
Ophiuchus.
eclipsed.
exactly there but not there. It's like a rainbow
It's
is
beautiful.
there but not there. Yeah.
It's beautiful. And the virgin birth of Athena that you just mentioned. So Ophiuchus figures have a virgin birth very, very often. Very, very often. Jesus is an Ophiuchus figure as well. So the Buddha is an Ophiuchus figure as well. They are exhibiting characteristics of higher self and that higher self wisdom to which we have access. So I didn't know that part about seven at all. And it's just, it's fantastic connection. So this is a painting of Lilith. Obviously it's more modern, John Collier, and you had it in your blog post, Scott. There's his dates.
painting.
But here's an ancient, I mean, it almost looks like a photograph. What a painting.
Yeah.
Had you seen that Nastasia Kinski poster from the 80s with the snake around her?
I had, yes.
Yeah.
Kind
of a modern Lilith.
That was a great blog post. Yeah, we'll have to definitely link to that blog post and everything in the show notes, however you do that. But the blog post is fantastic with Natasha Kinski doing the same pose in the 80s. But I have a more ancient picture that some people do believe this may be connected to Lilith. This is called the Burney relief, I think it's called, or the Burney figure. It was discovered, I don't know exactly when it was discovered, but it's passed through a few different ownerships, if you can own a piece of the ancient heritage of the world. But it was taken out of Iraq, ancient Mesopotamia area in, I think, the 20s or the 30s, the 1920s, 1930s. Burney was a World War I captain in the infantry or something in the British, English, I don't know all the background, but this is now in the British Museum. This figure, she may be associated with the goddess Erish Kigal, which is the goddess of the underworld. It's clearly a goddess. She has a crowned headdress. This triple crown on her head designates a deity. Both male and female wear these crowns, god crowns or goddess crowns in the ancient artwork. But look at how she's got wings. She's holding kind of a ring on one hand, or maybe in both hands, and a stick. So look at Ophiuchus. Look at the two halves of the serpent. One half has a ring, one half has a stick. That's the serpent's tail and the serpent's head. Well, there are figures in myth who carry a spear, and spears are associated with Ophiuchus. There's even figures who carry two spears, like Hector in the Iliad. He's definitely associated with Ophiuchus, and he carries two spears. And sometimes it even says one spear has a ring on the end of it, like a handle or something. That's a ring. So I would argue that this figure, which is sometimes argued to be associated with Lilith, is associated with Ophiuchus. And see the owls? I argue that Athena is connected to Ophiuchus. The evidence is beyond doubt.
And the owl is her symbol.
And she has an owl. I really suspect that serpent's head kind of looks like the face of an owl, and you can think of an owl being held. I didn't show too many pictures of, I've got other presentations where I show Athena, but the wings, I want to point out the wings. She's got wings. Oh, and also the bird's feet. Look at the feet of Ophiuchus. Well, beneath kind of the house-shaped body of Ophiuchus. And then there's the wings. There's a mosaic that was found in Pompeii, just recently been cleaned off, and I did a blog post and maybe even a video about it. This is a floor mosaic in Pompeii. And there's this figure in the center who's kind of got these moth wings. And then he's underneath another two winged figures, but it's almost like he's going upwards. He's got fire coming out of his head. He's got a scorpion underneath him, and then a cobra snake beneath that, and then an angel kind of leading him upwards. What's going on here? Mm-hmm. He's an Ophiuchus figure. Ophiuchus is the transformation. He's above Scorpio. He's got wings. There are winged figures associated with Ophiuchus. That winged figure that I just showed you. The figure holding a crown, Hercules, his sword can sometimes be envisioned as wings, and I can show some artifacts from the Louvre that prove that from ancient Greece, but this is Roman era. I'm kind of rushing a little bit, but you can even see the Hydra. It looks like a cobra. There's Scorpio. There's Ophiuchus is this transformation, pivotal, higher wisdom, higher learning, higher self, connection with the divine figure. And sometimes is depicted as having wings. Sometimes it's depicted as holding a pine cone in an upheld hand, a pine cone. See the little serpent's head? That could be a pine. I could show another picture. I didn't put it in this one. But this is an interesting, I've never shown this on any other podcast, but I was just actually talking, with Ksenia, like I said, and mentioning Russian fairy tales. I had a book as a child, not this illustration isn't from that, of Russian fairy tales. And the witches in Russian fairy tales live in a certain type of a hut. It's like Slavic fairy tales, Slavic folklore. The hut will often have chicken feet. The hut itself will be on chicken legs and can stand up and turn around and then squat back down. That's the kind of hut that a witch will live in. So this is from the story of Vasilissa the Beautiful. It's actually a traumatic story. Her mother, when she's very young, her mother is going to die. And she knows she's going to die. And so she gives Vasilissa a little doll. And she says, I know things might be hard for you after I die, my young daughter. I'll give you this doll. You can tell your troubles to the doll. And then the mother dies. And then the father remarries, of course, a wicked stepmother. That's who she remarries. And she has two daughters of her own. And she's very jealous of Vasilissa because Vasilissa is so beautiful that, she kind of feels jealous for her daughters not getting any attention because Vasilissa gets so much attention. And so she makes Vasilissa do all these horrible chores, like enormous numbers of chores. And she can never finish them. There's so many. But she tells the troubles to the doll. And the doll says, go to sleep. I got it under control. She goes to sleep, and in the morning, all the chores are done. Everything's done perfectly. So the wicked stepmother can never get the best of her. And she's like, how are we going to get rid of this Vasilissa? I know. She tells her daughters a secret plan. I'm going to give you each a task. You're going to crochet. You're going to knit. Vasilissa, you're going to spin wool. Or I'm going to have Vasilissa spin wool. She's not in on the plan. And then the mother puts out all the fires in the house except for one little candle. And then the three sisters or stepsisters are doing their tasks. Vasilissa's spinning. The other two sisters are crocheting and knitting. And then one sister gets up to pretend to adjust the candle, and she puts it out. And she says, oh no, we don't have any fire. And the other sister says, oh, well, I can crochet without light. And then the other sister says, well, I can knit without light. And then they both say, but Vasilissa, you can't spin without light. You can't do it. You better go get some fire. And the only one who has fire is the witch in the middle of the forest. Well, there's a picture of higher self again, the doll that does everything. It's funny, it synchronistically lines up with my story of I was trying so hard all night to figure it out. And then I went to sleep and the doll took care of everything, or the higher self, the twin, the divine twin. Anyway, she goes to the forest to the witch who lives in a hut that is on chicken legs. Can you see how a hut could be on chicken legs in this outline of Ophiuchus?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we just saw an ancient, that Bernie, it's called the Queen of the Night. If you go to the British Museum, that ancient goddess, that we don't know who it is, but some people think it's related to Lilith. Some people think it's,
maybe.
Yeah, Ereshkigal. She has chicken legs. She's an Ophiuchus figure. She's an Ophiuchus figure. And Ophiuchus is associated with chicken legs. And there's a hut that's on chicken legs in this story of Vasilissa the Beautiful. But but there's a negative connotation to wisdom sometimes too. And I love the Odyssey of ancient Greece. And Odysseus, who is his goddess? Who helps him the most? I already gave it away. Who's the god or goddess who helps Odysseus the most? Poseidon has it out for Odysseus. Poseidon's like the antagonist god in that whole story, because we're down here in this lower realm of ocean, lower elements of water and earth. Poseidon's like the antagonist. Who's his helper? It is the goddess Athena. She is true wisdom. And Odysseus is marked by wisdom most of the time, but sometimes he just can't help himself and he messes everything up. And there's one time, a very poignant time, where he wants to hear the song of the sirens. He has to hear their song. And I got to teach the Odyssey at the college level at West Point. It's just amazing. And some scholar at some point, I forget where, analyzed the song of the sirens. It's in the text of the Odyssey, and they're saying, "Come here, Odysseus." So what he does is he, I've got a picture of him on the ship. Where is Odysseus?
That's like the Starbucks logo there, by the way. The
yes,
scene.
Absolutely. We'll get back to that. So that Odysseus, I just grabbed this actually while we were talking, because I was like, oh, this is perfect. He wants to hear the song of the sirens. So he says to the men, "Put wax in your ears, and whatever I do, do not untie me." And he ties him. They tie him to the mast, so he doesn't put wax in his ears. He can hear the song of the sirens, and they're all rowing by without hearing it. Because if you hear their song, everyone who hears their songs just goes over to their rocks, and shipwreck dies, and the harpies or the sirens devour the poor sailors. But he has to hear it. He has to hear it. He's like the seeker of knowledge. And what their song is, there's a scholar, I forget who to attribute this to. The scholar says, if you look at their song, they're promising knowledge of everything. We will tell you everything. You will know the secrets of this and the secrets of that. And to me, the sirens, let me go back to my siren picture. This is obviously from the 1500s. It says, "Von dem Meerfräulein," mermaid. This is the mermaid is actually a pretty malevolent figure. She often lures sailors to their death. And in that story of the sirens, they are there singing to lure the sailors to their death. But how are they luring them? With a promise of wisdom that's like selfish wisdom. Not in the Solomon story. God says, "What do you want, Solomon?" Solomon doesn't just say, "I want to be the wisest, smartest, know everything." He actually says, "I don't know how. I feel like a little child. I'm in charge of this great people, and they come to me for judgment, but I feel like a little child. Can you please give me wisdom to help the people so that I can judge rightly and know what to do?" To help others it's wisdom, not just for your own puffing up. It's wisdom to help others. And so that beautiful story,
wisdom to serve or something. Yeah.
Like you were saying, Geoff, is sometimes I get this like addiction to knowledge.
Yeah.
It's like a glass of whiskey and I want another one right after I had that one.
Yeah. It is.
Then I settle down into the true. I have to relax. Like the doll says, "Go to sleep, Vassilis. Will you stop trying so hard? I've got it all under control." And so look at this mermaid from the 1500s. Now look at the outline of Ophiuchus. As Scott just perceptively and insightfully pointed out, that's the Starbucks logo. So if we cross off the little chicken feet under the hut, just put your two fingers over your screen. And now the two tails of the mermaid, the central body, and the two serpent halves become the two tails. And look at her arms. Is the arm on the left up high, holding the top of her tail?
Yeah, the arms follow.
Look at the
Ophiuchus pattern. Yeah.
Like, who knew? Like, what's going on? This is the 1500s or the 1600s. It's like your work, Scott, of finding, wait a minute, there's this thing in the Sergi, France that's pointing to this and that. And it was obviously not built in ancient times. Someone is carrying this on.
Wow, David, that was amazing and beautiful. Beautiful sentiment to bring it to a nice conclusion. This kind of dance between kind of selfish wisdom sounds like the wrong word, actually, but kind of like it's almost like small wisdom and great wisdom or something. It's like the great wisdom is like the wisdom for the benefit of more than just one. But it's like the wisdom to serve others, to make the world a better place, that the wisdom that I am gifted with can be of service to others and the world and make this place a better place, contribute to its growth,
That request is already wise. That is actually a wise request. So, I don't know how much he really needed wisdom.
Scott.
You know,
Good point, Scott. Midas already had gold too.
But David, it's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for helping us keep our podcast to the 30-minute window that we've been so strict about. You know, it's like I think we did well today, Scott. Did we? Are we still within our time window?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So no, David, it's been so amazing, man. It's felt like very inspiring. You know, you've blown my mind. You've opened like yet another window into the mystery, which is just beautiful to hear. And also just personally, it's so great to reconnect and see the journey you've been on, see that you've been really developing your whole soul's trip, which is so impressive. And it's just really nice to catch up. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. You know, I hope we're definitely going to do this, you know, with all our guests in a continuous role. You know what I mean? So this is the first of many, I hope. Yeah, we're going to do it again.
For sure. Well, thank you so much, Geoff and Scott. Those are very kind words. And like I said, I hope it benefits others.
Hey, very importantly, just before we go, David, as well. Sorry, I nearly forgot. But you know, one of the things we like to do just before we sign off is just give you like an opportunity to direct people to where they may get their hands on those 9 books or see some of your videos. Or you were speaking about, you have some nice courses that you're developing now. We're all doing so many courses these days with the way the world is. Please share where the best place is for people to go to connect with you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Geoff and Scott. And this is, I'll just share this. Am I sharing the screen? Yeah, I just started this, just launched. So my main website is called Star Myths of the World, and that's starmythworld.com. And it has the books there, and I'll be putting links to the courses there too. But I've just started the Undying Stars Academy to really try, and some of this is best really taught with systematic video as opposed to books. It can come to life a little bit more. So I've got 2 courses now, and these are the foundational courses. And then I'm going to be going into, when you have this kind of groundwork, then it's more profitable to go into the stories of the Bible. So these are my 2 introductory courses, Celestial Mechanics and the Myths, which to understand how the celestial mechanics work, like the Zodiac and the ecliptic and all those things we were just talking about. And then
that's amazing.
Recovering deeper self that we were also touching on, recovering our deeper self. And as I said, I'm not a psychologist. I'm pointing to the myths as a tremendous resource to come alongside what these healers are discovering and talking about and helping with their therapies. So these are laying the framework that then, okay, I understand if you're arguing that the myths are about recovering self, now when I go and look at a Bible story like the story of the flood in Genesis, we can talk about the trauma and the restoration, and how that's being depicted. And so these will be like foundational and hopefully very helpful to all this, because as we've seen, it is a pretty vast and deep system that these ancients gave to us. It's like a precious treasure.
I love how you're like Theseus laying the golden thread that connects all of the world's myths. And I've never seen anyone do that before. I think this is a tremendous resource for people to realize how all these myths are connected. And you're just like our guide, our Virgil, taking us through,
So, yeah, it's really amazing. So that's undyingsstars.com
Thank you.
Is where people could go. Undyingsstars.com, yeah?
Undying Stars is for the courses, and Star Myth World is all my other stuff, and I'm going to link the 2 together eventually. But that's the course is there on undyingsstars.com. So yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you, David. Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure, man. All right.
I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And thank you, dear listeners. Thank you for staying with us all the way through this one. This is one of our longer ones, but you know what? We couldn't stop that, David. It was so good. Such an inspiration blast. Thank you. Till next time.